Before we get started, I think it's important to remember that at the end of any drama or any play, the good guy and the bad guy hold hands and they bow together to the audience, and the audience claps for them both because they played their parts well in the great drama of the history of mankind. So, as we set the context for how everything began here, I think it's important to remember that as much as we want to be kind of tied up with good and tied up with evil, that ultimately we're just playing our roles in this planet, and which is why this first chapter is so foundational and really important. I think the big mistake a lot of people have made and sort of write off the whole Judeo-Christian tradition is that they look at this and say this is a replacement for scientific evolution or scientific thought, because we could clearly see in evolution that it didn't take 7 days to go make the universe. It took a much, much longer time. But then, I had the realization when I was much younger that, when you look at evolution, how it plays out and how the planets were created and what came first and what came next, and you kind of look at these 7 days that were written in this text almost as like a piece of poetry, you could see that it's kind of uniquely following the same pattern. But by which case, the only difference is a day today means 24 hours, but a day back then might mean, a whole epic or an eon of time. So it's really important to see that it's not necessarily a substitute of one for the other between religion and science, but rather they're all kind of saying the same exact thing, just with the tools that they had available. Because this is a story that's lasted this long, there's important lessons to be extracted from this. This is a dramatic realization of humanity itself, and humanity almost realizing itself and playing itself out when you put it into tough situations and when you have them interact with each other. So let's set the context and the exposition here. In this first chapter, in the beginning, Genesis 1, God essentially creates the whole of everything. He creates the light and the dark, the stars and the planets, the water, the land, and then the water creatures, the air creatures, the land creatures, and eventually humans. And then after there's humans, that they essentially kind of give the relationships between each of these items. And I think that's really important because when everything gets started, it's just chaos. It's just darkness. It's just a bunch of randomness. And you can almost see that in places like just a city or your room or your thoughts or your email inbox or your relationships, that it just naturally scatters because there's a lot of forces pulling you left and right. But what's interesting about this is that structure is being created. Structure is being created out of nothing, and every part of that structure is being given roles. So, for example, we would say that, hey, we created the waters and it was good. We created the lands and it was good. And then we're going to have seeds, and these seeds are going to grow up from the ground, and that was good. And, we're going to have these people, and these people are going to have dominion over all of these beasts, and that was good. And on the seventh day, we're going to go rest. So there's a lot that comes from this, but really when we think about how we ended up the way that we are today, with all of our frustrations and how interesting humans could be, and all equally, like I'm saying right now, frustrating they could be, it's a result of pieces that got put into place long ago, and as a result of them playing out to their natural conclusions, here we are. So let's start at the first step. The big thing about this chapter, it's about creating structure, and I'll give the first lesson on performance from this particular chapter, and that lesson is that we set our first things first. Okay, the common structure we would see psychologically is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where basically most people are going to want to have their physiological needs satisfied first before even their safety needs. We're going to want food and water before we even want shelter, and then before we want love and belonging and esteem and social skills type needs. We're going to want to get those first two figured out first before we think about that. And then after we have that satisfied, we can start thinking about esteem and competence and sort of the love of self. And at which point, when that's satiated, we could start thinking about actually self-actualizing. But you can see in the order in this story that it's almost starting with the first things first. So the first lesson here on performance is set your first things first. Get the foundations correct. And if something's not working, whether you're finding you're incompetent at something, you're lacking something, that there are problems everywhere, heck, there's always going to be problems to be found, and that's something that's unique about humans, is that we try to find ways of making things better. And if we don't have that feeling of incompetence, then we just stop improving upon things. So when we assess and analyze what is missing and what we should be doing to fix it, we should be looking foundational first, which is why I always like to say, if you're having problems, with your workplace, first let's start with your health. Are you getting the right foods? Are you getting the right sleep? Are you getting the right hydration? And then we can start looking at, your shelter. Is like, do you feel at home in the place that you're in? Do you feel protected? Do you feel safe? Do you feel competent within your own abilities? That would be the next step. Sort of, the love and belonging of the togetherness of other people, of a community. And then sort of that self-esteem aspect of things, which I find that to be interesting. You would think that you would have physiological needs, safety needs, then self-esteem, then love and belonging. But no, it's actually love and belonging first. So finding your community, it's absolutely important, which is why it's so paramount just to understand these lessons in communication, how to connect with people better, and defining your tribe, and sort of locking down and playing your role in the tribe. Which leads me to my next point on communication, is that all of this is essentially a speaking of the world into existence. We're saying, hey, this is this now. This item, this piece of land is called land. We're going to call this land, and this is where the land creatures, the ones that live on there, take domain. And here's the sea. This is the waters. This is where the sea creatures take domain, and this is where the water is. And there are certain rules that land creatures and sea creatures and even the air creatures have to go play by. We're creating labels and relationships, within these labels. But what's most important is that we're creating a label behind something. And labels are incredibly important when we start thinking about relationships. We can't think about relationships until we've called something what it is, and essentially letting the world know, like, what role does it play? Okay, like, I have a shirt on, but in a different universe, it could have easily been called a loincloth. In fact, it was at one point in history, which technically is, part of the same universe, but a different time. We have different ways we could go slice this up. When we put labels on things, now we get to start creating relationships between those things. So the lesson on communication is being able to assign correct labels. The most correct labels are going to be the ones that carry a moniker of truth, that each of the labels respect each other and remain consistent over time. We can go and call, again, this shirt a loincloth, but eventually it's going to converge back to a shirt, because that is what most people agree upon for what it is. That was what it was made to be, and that's sort of like the common domain of language that we tend to share. So labels is really important. And something you could start doing, as a way of creating your own world and creating your own environment. You can assign new labels to new things based on some of the goals you might have. So for example, if I go out to like a grocery store and I'm trying to be on a diet and I'm tempted by some of the tastier foods, but I know I'm supposed to eat healthy, I simply change the labels. Like, okay, that's unhealthy food, that's healthy food, but maybe I might change the labels to that's poison and that is medicine. Those are familiar labels, and they're just as valid one way or another, especially when it comes with relation to my goal. So goals are one thing, but, within the realm of the universe, what is the universe's goal? What is God's goal at the end of the day? And I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of it is just to continue creating structure. It's for people to come together in unique ways to go and build something larger. And a part of me also suspects that this great reward at the end of life, this heaven that people get to go to, simply is the reward of the culmination of all these lessons over time that have led to greater communities, to a greater sense of self-love, to a greater sense of creating a lineage, to creating progeny, to creating a legacy, that by the time you hit the end of your life, everyone around you is smiling and they're happy. And to me, that is in one way a form of paradise, where things worked out exactly the way that created those structures. Whereas maybe hell might be the opposite, where no one's around you, you're depressed, you're destitute, you don't have anything to look forward to, you regret so much. It's just, you could literally feel yourself disintegrating over into chaos. So that's sort of like the grand scheme of things, but we're just setting the exposition to context here. And to set an exposition and a context correctly, yes, from a performance side, we're doing first things first. From a communication side, we're going to go and start creating labels to things, calling things what they are, and being accurate with them with relation to the context of truth, which, in my opinion, truth is the ultimate goal, is to go and achieve any goal that you might have, any localized goal, whether it's to make money or to win a job or find a significant other. They all exist as localized examples within the ultimate goal, which is to achieve this type of truth. And I think that's what this text is trying to lean towards. And then the lesson on leadership is, after we give context and we give the labels to everything, we want to create relationships between those labels. Okay, a leader, in my opinion, is someone that goes first, but it's also someone that creates structure as a result of going first. We're going to go follow the leader, so the person that goes first, by definition, is the leader. But anyone could go be the leader at that point. If it's the first, if we're thinking of a school of fish and they go left, the first fish over there is the leader. And then if they get pulled right because they saw something else, then that one's the leader, and so on and so forth. But from a leadership perspective, one thing that's common amongst a lot of leaders is that they're very, very, very good at creating structures. And we could say that this is we could say maybe God is sort of the ultimate leader. And the perfect example of that is that he was creating structure from the beginning of time. He saw that there was all this chaos, and then we said, we're going to create a structure, and it was good. We're going to create this structure, and it was good. But then he said, here's their role inside of this structure. Here are the relationships between these people, between these entities, between the land and the sea, between light and the darkness, and the role of work versus rest. We're starting to see that something's coming alive, because we're not only creating a structure, but we're making that structure dynamic and moving. And we do that by creating a closed loop of relationships where one is always relating to the other. There are defined sets of relationships. As a result of these relationships, structures will naturally emerge larger and larger and larger. And as we get later on, we'll discover there's more of these structures, like, the 10 Commandments, for example. These are rules given down from God, but it's not necessarily labels for what things are, but it's instructions for how people should interact with each other, such that if they interact with each other in that way, that they're going to find that the communities grow and grow and grow. Whereas if they disobey these rules, communities disintegrate when you take them to their natural conclusion. So that's the 3 lessons for today from Genesis 1, is that you want to have first things coming first. You can't build a castle without a foundation. You can't build your self-esteem until you have your health, your safety, and your love and belonging aspects handled. You're not going to self-actualize without having your self-esteem handled. You're not going to address your safety concerns until you have physiology handled. And whatever else you might be thinking about, when you go into a completely new field, you want to have the foundations of that field covered, the principles covered, so that when you accumulate experience, it could get put inside of the structure. It could be organized into the right places, so it's not chaos and just bumbling left and right. So first things first. Next, we're going to create labels. We're going to call things what they are. We're going to call things such that they respect the truth of what those things are. But we're also going to try to relate some of our goals and our aspirations to that truth, so we could create the proper labels that allow us to achieve the things that we want to do. And we know that we want to do them because they're respecting the truth ultimately. And the truth is actually really, really important here, especially when it comes to foundational things. Because even if there's a moniker of mistruth or anything that's falsified from the beginning, it represents a chink in the foundation. And the chink in the foundation, the taller you make the structure, the more pressure it puts on that little foundational piece. So it's absolutely crucial that when you're putting foundations together for whatever you're doing, especially how you are going to live your life in a way that you're maximizing your overall well-being, you want to start with foundations that respect the truth, period. The moment you start deviating from the foundation, you start killing some structures that get built on it, and eventually you end up in a situation where it all burns down one day, and you have to start from scratch. And I sincerely hope you start from truth the second time around. And then finally, as a leader, we're creating relationships. We're creating structure between these labels. This person is in charge of this thing, and it's good. This person has this role. This creature has this role on this planet, and it is good. This is the role of the light and the dark, and they never exist simultaneously. They always trade off between the daylight and then the night light. And also on the seventh day, this is the day to rest, to recover, to restore one's soul, to restore one's sense of meaning, to say, hey, we did all this work. We're going to go and enjoy ourselves. We're going to go celebrate. We're going to do whatever that is to respect that structure. It's a very mysterious structure. Why not just work 7 days? There's something mysterious about that seventh day of resting. And that seventh day of resting is at the foundation. So we don't want to ignore the idea that that seventh day, that holy day, that day of rest is absolutely fundamentally crucial to just living a good life as a human. So we want to acknowledge that. So those are the 3 lessons. I'll see you tomorrow for the next 3.